We had a name for it: Operation Delilah. It was our most sophisticated and cruelest project. We would assign our most intelligent, most deceptive members a single, focused mission: to identify the hidden cracks in your pastor's marriage and break it wide open. We studied them. We learned their weaknesses. We found the fractures in their foundation that no one else could see. We were experts in destruction, and I was the architect. I was the one who drew up the blueprints for these attacks, the one who designed the strategies that brought good men to their knees. In the next few minutes, I am going to confess everything. I will pull back the curtain and show you the enemy's playbook, exactly as I wrote it. I'll reveal the 3 primary vulnerabilities we exploited in every single pastor we targeted. I'll walk you through the step-by-step process of our attacks, from the initial reconnaissance to the final devastating blow. And I will tell you about the one spiritual weapon that made a pastor completely untouchable. The one weapon that not only stopped our plans cold, but ultimately led to my own defeat and deliverance. If you feel this is a message the church needs to hear, I ask you to subscribe now and turn on your notifications so you don't miss any part of this testimony. Give this video a like, because it helps push this warning out to more people. And let me ask you this in the comments. Have you ever felt that your pastor was under an unusual spiritual attack? To understand how I became the man who orchestrated these things, we have to go back. Back to a broken home, where a boy was looking for the power to control a life that was spinning out of control. My childhood wasn't a childhood. It was a war zone. I remember the smell of stale whiskey on my father's breath, the sound of a slammed door that meant he was home. The floorboards in our little house in Dayton, Ohio, seemed to hold their breath just like I did. My mother was a ghost in her own home, her silence a wall I could never climb. I'd sit in my room, arranging my toy soldiers in perfect, orderly lines. It was the only place in the world where I had any control. That hunger for control, for power over the chaos, it became the driving force of my entire life. The military was my first escape. The screaming drill sergeants, the rigid schedules, the starched uniforms. For me, it was paradise. It was order. It was predictable. It was there I met Senior Officer Crane. He wasn't just my superior. He was the father I always wished I had. He saw the fire in me, the ambition that was really just repackaged anger. He saw a tool he could sharpen. One evening, after a particularly successful training exercise, he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Raymond, there's a power that makes rank and medals look like children's toys. A circle of men who really run things. I think you're ready." He called them exclusive leadership meetings, but they weren't about military strategy. They were held in the back room of an old private club downtown. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the weight of secrets. These weren't just soldiers. They were judges, businessmen, politicians. Crane introduced me to their philosophy, a path to influence events, to bend reality to your will through ancient practices. He promised me the control I had craved my entire life. And standing in that room, surrounded by men who radiated absolute power, I felt for the first time that I was finally home. I had no idea what it would cost. The first tasks Officer Crane gave me were small, almost like tests. He'd point out a rival on the base and teach me how to focus my will, how to use suggestion and subtle spiritual pressure to influence outcomes. I saw it work. A promotion was denied. A project was sabotaged. Each success was a hit of the drug I'd craved my whole life: control. Crane would clap me on the shoulder, his praise a substitute for the fatherly approval I never got. I was hooked, not just on the power, but on the validation. I was good at this. And I wanted more. After my honorable discharge, the order offered me a full-time position. My military mind for strategy made me a natural fit for what they called the religious division. My job was no longer about base politics, it was about dismantling churches. The rituals became more intense. The rooms were always cold, with a faint metallic smell, like burnt ozone that clung to your clothes for days. I felt a heavy physical pressure during these ceremonies, a weight that promised power, but demanded submission. I rose through the ranks quickly, moving from a mere participant to a key strategist, designing campaigns that would last for years. But the power came with a price I wasn't prepared for. Sleep became a battleground. I'd be ripped from dreams by night terrors, visions of the very entities I communed with turning on me, their whispers twisting into threats. I developed chronic paranoia, constantly checking over my shoulder, unable to trust even my closest associates in the order. My own mother told me on the phone, "Raymond, I don't recognize your voice anymore. You sound empty." I brushed it off as the cost of doing business, the price of real influence. I was too blind to see I was being hollowed out. By my late 30s, I was an architect of ruin, overseeing operations across several states. I had the power, the status, and the respect of men who could make world events tremble. From the outside, I had achieved perfect control. But on the inside, I was a prisoner. I couldn't form a real friendship. I couldn't feel joy or peace. Looking in the mirror, I saw a stranger with dead eyes. I had all the power I had ever dreamed of, but I was completely, utterly alone. I didn't know it yet, but the darkness I had embraced was about to collect its debt in full. The power I held was a poison with a slow, sweet taste. On the surface, I had everything that broken little boy in Ohio ever wanted: influence, respect, and absolute control. But the foundation of my life was rotting away. The first real cost was my family. I remember the last time I saw my mother for Christmas. I walked in and she just stared at me. She pulled me aside in the kitchen and whispered, "Raymond, your eyes, they're cold. I don't know who you are anymore." I never got another invitation after that. The door to my own family was closed, and I was the one who had locked it. My body started to betray me too. I began suffering from migraines that felt like a white-hot spike being driven behind my right eye, leaving me blind for hours. Doctors ran every test, MRIs, blood work. They found nothing. It was a spiritual sickness, a decay starting from the inside out. I was constantly exhausted, a bone-deep fatigue that no amount of sleep could fix. I was a commander in a spiritual war, but my own body had become the first casualty. I was winning battles for the Order while my own soul was dying from 1,000 invisible wounds. The nights were the worst. Sleep wasn't rest. It was a rehearsal for hell. I was tormented by nightmares of the very entities I served, their whispers of power turning into mocking laughter and threats. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced someone was in the room with me. I tried to walk away twice. The first time, a freak electrical fire destroyed my apartment, an unmistakable warning. The second time, I was in a car accident that police said I should have never walked away from. I learned the hard way. There was no exit. I was their property now. My lowest point came on a Tuesday night in my high-rise apartment in Atlanta. I was 38 years old. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city lights, and I felt nothing. My family was gone. My health was shot. My mind was a battlefield, and I was losing. I had sacrificed my own identity for a power that left me completely, utterly alone. I was a hollow man in a dark room, a strategist with no one to talk to, a king of a kingdom of ashes. It was from this pit of despair that I received my next assignment. A small-town pastor named David. My next assignment was a man named David, a pastor in a small church in Macon, Georgia. For 2 years, I threw everything I had at him. I orchestrated his financial ruin, saw his wife die from a cancer that came out of nowhere, and pushed his son into a heroin addiction that broke his heart. His church was empty. By every metric of my dark world, I had won. But he didn't break. Every morning at 4 a.m. from my cold apartment, I would perform the rituals, sending curses of despair and suicide his way, trying to land the final blow. But one morning, something different happened. As I entered the trance, I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I was given a vision. I could see Pastor David clear as day on his knees, weeping on the cold concrete floor of his empty church. But as he prayed, his words weren't sound. I saw them. He prayed, "Father, forgive them. Have mercy on the one you've sent to destroy me." And the words came out of his mouth as columns of pure, white fire rising to heaven. Flanking him were two colossal angels, their forms made of light, holding swords of flame. Their presence was so holy, it felt like my spirit was being torn apart just by looking at them. I watched as my curses, which appeared as black, screaming darts of energy, flew toward him. But they never got close. Hundreds of feet away from that angelic shield, they just disintegrated into ash and vanished. I had felt the parasitic power of the entities I served. But this was different. This was absolute, crushing, and yet somehow merciful authority. The vision ended, but a voice spoke, not to my ears, but directly into my soul. It was calm, final, and it shook the foundations of my reality. It said, "You are fighting a battle you have already lost." The force of that voice, of that vision, threw me backward onto the floor of my apartment. I landed hard, gasping for air. A conviction of my own evil, a weight I had never allowed myself to feel, crashed down on me, and I started vomiting uncontrollably. For the first time in my life, I was terrified, not of a rival, not of a demon, but of God. For 3 days I didn't eat or sleep. I was tormented by that voice and the image of those angels. The power I had worshipped was a child's toy compared to what I had seen. There was only one thing I could do. On Sunday morning, I got in my car and drove the hour and a half to Macon. I walked into Pastor David's little church right in the middle of his service. I didn't stop at the back. I walked straight down the center aisle, fell on my knees at the altar in front of him, and confessed everything through uncontrollable sobs. If you've ever felt the power of prayer break through darkness in your own life, please give this a like. And share in the comments what God has done for you. Your story might be the hope someone else needs to see today. Pastor David sat with me for weeks, just listening. Once the initial storm of my confession passed, I began to lay out the enemy's playbook for him, piece by piece. I explained that every attack started with a reconnaissance phase. We'd send our most unassuming members into a church, and for 3 to 6 months, they'd be the perfect congregants. They volunteered, they tithed, and they took detailed notes. They were looking for one of 3 primary vulnerabilities. First, pride. Did the pastor love the sound of his own voice on stage? Second, financial stress. Was his personal identity tied to the size of the budget? And third, the most common entry point of all, marital cracks. Once we identified the vulnerability, we launched the specific operation. If we found cracks in the marriage, we initiated Operation Delilah. A highly intelligent and deceptive woman would be deployed. Her first mission was always to befriend the pastor's wife, to gain her trust and learn all the inside information. Then she would orchestrate accidental private meetings with the pastor, positioning herself as the only one who truly understood his unique ministry stress. Emotional intimacy was the bait, and it always led to physical seduction. We took down an Atlanta megachurch pastor that way. For financial stress, we'd spiritually influence the church's biggest donors to suddenly stop giving, while simultaneously causing expensive building failures, creating a perfect storm of desperation. But our cruelest and most effective tactic was the generational assault. We would assign specific demonic entities to the pastor's children, spirits of rebellion, sexual confusion, and addiction. We knew that a pastor's ministry is crippled when his own house is in chaos, because it doesn't just attack his reputation, it attacks his personal hope. These were the secrets I confessed. But the most impactful revelation, the one that explained why Pastor David had survived, was our one great obstacle, a pastor who maintained a disciplined private life of daily prayer and fasting. I had exposed their entire playbook, but now the real battle for my own soul was just beginning. Laying everything bare at that altar felt like a release, but it was just the beginning of the real war. The entities I once commanded now saw me as a traitor, and they came for me with a vengeance. For the first 6 months, sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Night after night, they ripped into my dreams with visions of my own destruction, their whispers of power twisting into threats. I'd wake up screaming, the faint smell of sulfur in the room. Pastor David taught me something I never knew: to speak the name of Jesus not as a plea, but as a command. His small church formed a 24/7 prayer chain, a shield of intercession around me. My old associates didn't just let me go either. They saw me as a liability, a loose end that needed to be tied off. About a month after my conversion, I got a call from Officer Crane. His voice was cold as ice. "Raymond," he said, "you've made a grave mistake. There are no retirement plans in our line of work." A week later, a black sedan ran my car off a slick road just outside of Athens. I walked away without a scratch, but the message was clear. With the help of Pastor David and a network of other ministries, I had to disappear for a time, changing my name and relocating just to stay alive. But the fiercest war wasn't external. It was the one raging inside my own mind. The weight of the lives I had destroyed was a physical thing, a stone in my gut that never went away. There were dark nights, sitting alone in a small apartment, where the temptation to go back was overwhelming. Not because I missed the darkness, but because the shame felt so unbearable, I thought I was truly unforgivable. The only thing that broke through was Pastor David sitting with me for hours, page by page, forcing me to memorize scriptures about God's grace until they became my only defense against the accusations in my head. So those were the battles I faced. The nightly demonic assaults were broken by the authority in the name of Jesus. The physical threats from the coven were survived only through the protection of God's hidden community. The war against guilt was won by clinging to the promises of Scripture. Were there relapses? Not in my faith, but in my hope. There were days the shame won, where I believed I was worthless. But the church family always pulled me back. It took 6 brutal months of hand-to-hand spiritual combat for the chaos to finally subside, for me to feel like I was standing on solid ground for the first time in my entire life. That war for my soul lasted years, but the ground I stand on today is solid. The same strategic mind that once designed blueprints for ruin is now used to build defenses. I travel to churches and leadership conferences, not as a destroyer, but as a watchman. I take my insider knowledge, every dark tactic I once perfected, and I lay it bare for pastors and their families. I teach them how to recognize the reconnaissance phase, how to spot the setup for an Operation Delilah. My old job was to find cracks in the foundation. My new one is to help them seal those cracks with prayer. The man who lived in total isolation, who couldn't trust a single soul, is now surrounded by a true family. Pastor David officiated my wedding to my wife, Sarah, a woman who knows my entire story and sees me not as a monster, but as a miracle. My relationship with my mother has been slowly, painfully restored. She told me last Christmas, with tears in her eyes, "Raymond, I have my son back. I went from a room full of powerful co-conspirators to a small church full of brothers and sisters who would die for me. That is a wealth I never knew existed." But don't think for a second that the scars just disappear. The migraines I suffered are gone, but the memories of the lives I shattered are not. Some nights, the weight of what I did still feels heavy, a debt that grace alone could pay. It's a constant reminder of where I came from and a source of humility that keeps me on my knees. I am not a perfect man. I am a rescued man. The enemy still whispers temptations of pride, reminding me of the power I once wielded. The battle changes, but the war for your focus never truly ends. The greatest change, though, is how I see people. Before, I saw a pastor and his family as a target, a collection of vulnerabilities to be exploited for a strategic win. Now, through God's eyes, I see a beloved son or daughter on the front lines, taking heavy fire for the sake of the gospel. I see their children not as collateral damage, but as precious souls under a targeted assault. My purpose shifted from serving myself and a dark kingdom to serving God by protecting His people. And that's why I have to tell you what I'm about to say. My purpose has completely changed, and that's why I have to tell you this. I am living proof that our battle is not against flesh and blood. It is against the calculated, strategic, and relentless spiritual forces that are trying to tear your church apart, starting with its leader. The attacks I designed weren't random acts of evil. They were military operations targeting specific vulnerabilities. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I am telling you this to make you fight. Because the war I once waged against your pastor is still happening, whether you see it or not. If you're sitting in a church, I need you to understand, your pastor is on the front lines, and your prayers are their air support. I beg you, pray for their protection, for their marriage, for their children, and for their private walk with God every single day. And if you're like I was, caught in the occult, I know the power you feel. It's intoxicating. But it's a borrowed power that is destroying you from the inside out. It's a lie that demands everything and gives you nothing but emptiness. I know because I was its most loyal servant. There is a way out. The mercy of Jesus Christ reached me in the deepest, darkest pit of my own making, and it can reach you right now, wherever you are. The power I served was parasitic. It could only twist and destroy what God had made. But the power that saved me is a creative power, the one that defeated death itself. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to be good enough. All you have to do is surrender and ask Him for help. His hand is reaching for you, just as it reached for me. If this story has impacted you, please subscribe and turn on your notifications for more testimonies of God's power. Like this video to help this warning reach more people, and share it with someone who needs to hear there is hope. In the comments, I want to hear your story, or if you need prayer, just write, "I need prayer." I will read them. The man who once designed the blueprints for breaking families now begs you to help build a defense. And that defense starts on your knees.